It is 6 o'clock. So everybody, welcome to TED for today. There is our check-in code. And today we're very excited to have Jose Padilla presenting on legal entity formation and some things that are unique to Native Americans and tribes. And so we're going to explore that together. Jose has been in our world almost since we started here in 2018, and he used to practice and be in Las Vegas. And then he moved to Texas like a trader, but he still comes back frequently, and he's always willing to help out and mentor. So we really appreciate Jose. Let me go on to, this is the rest of the schedule. So on Wednesday, you'll be hearing me talk about Pitch Decks 101 to get you guys started on creating. And here is Jose's picture, but it doesn't have a connection for you, Jose. So I'm going to look up your email and I'll put it into the chat. But now you can take it away. I'm going to stop sharing so you can start.
Okay, everybody can see my screen?
Yes, sir.
So for those who don't know me, quick introduction. I've been an attorney for about 25 years now. I've practiced all over, but I was in Las Vegas before coming to Texas, where I'm now in San Antonio. I did teach gaming law while I was at UNLV's law school, and I taught health law at NYU. I went to Harvard undergrad, Penn for law school, started my own practice about 6 years ago. And so all my clients are either investment funds, investors, or startups and entrepreneurs. So I'm in this space every day. And today, what we're talking about is about the legal formation and strategy. And the first thing to realize is what it's all about is protection from liability. We'll be talking about really entity formation or incorporation, but the other aspect is insurance, which people don't talk about as much, but it is the other way to protect from liability is you can buy insurance, but the other way is to form an entity, because the way it works is when you're using a legal entity like an LLC or corporation, the liabilities are limited to just the assets of that entity. So that's what they're talking about when they're talking about limited liability, in that you're not going to be liable personally. So your home, your car, anything in your personal name is not subject to a lawsuit or any debt that's only in the name of the entity. Which is why a lot of times if you're trying to get a loan and you have an LLC or corporation, they're going to ask for a personal guarantee because they want access to your personal assets. That's the point of a personal guarantee, because otherwise they would not be able to go after your personal assets without such a guarantee. And that's how it protects your liability. It's just whatever the assets owned by that entity are subject to that. So what kind of entities are there? The main ones that we'll be talking about, there's quite a bit more, and it's all state dependent. That's one thing to note in the US. Every state it's all done by state. So there are certain entities that only exist in certain states and don't exist in all states. An example for Nevada is we have an LLC. Nevada also has a series LLC, which is not really applicable for what we're doing, but just to note that only 16 states offer a series LLC. Many other states do not offer that. Like California next door does not offer a series LLC. So you can form one in Nevada, but you cannot form one in California. And they're treated a little bit differently in different states. So that's one thing to note. It's a state by state deal. But every state now has a limited liability company, an LLC, and every state has corporation. And then among corporations, you may hear the term C Corp or S Corp. Just note that C Corp and S Corp are IRS tax designations. They're not actually legal terms, because really what they're really talking about is how are you being taxed. Traditionally, a corporation by default is a C Corp, which means that it's taxed as a separate person. And that results in double taxation because the corporation makes a profit and then it's taxed on that profit. And then if it shares that profit as a dividend to the shareholders, those dividends to the shareholders are considered income to the shareholder. And then now the shareholder pays income tax on that income. So the same dollar gets taxed 2 times when it's through a C Corp, or essentially a corporation. And the reason it's called a C Corp, by the way, is it's short for saying it's taxed under subchapter C of the IRS tax code. And then there's subchapter S of the IRS tax code, or an S Corp, which basically means that it's not taxed as a separate person, it's a pass-through. And so all of the profits of the corporation are passed through to the shareholders, and then the shareholders pay taxes on that. An LLC has the choice. Essentially, by default, it's going to be a pass-through, but it could choose to be taxed as a corporation. So that's why if you using the term C corp, like you can have an LLC that's taxed as a C corp, or you can have an LLC that's taxed as an S corp. And one thing to note is that S corp taxation is different than pass through, because there are some slight differences. Well, one I'll give you right now is that an LLC under the tax rules, an owner of an LLC cannot be an employee of the LLC, but an owner of an S corp can be an employee of an S corp. So it is possible to then ask the LLC to be taxed as an S corp, and then you can be the employee of the LLC because the LLC is an S corp. Kind of confusing, and just knowing that's why we have all these kind of. That's why I always tell people to just separate the tax part from the legal part. And legally, it's more simple. It's actually just limited liability company and corporation. And then you're choosing usually, do you do it from the home state? Do you choose another state? Delaware, for example, is the most common for startups. And just note, like I said before, it's all state dependent. And also, like you can live anywhere and have an entity from anywhere. So you're not limited. You can be living in Nevada and use a Maine corporation if you'd like. You can live in Maine and use a Florida entity. You can do what you want. The thing is, wherever you're living, you'll need to register that entity in the state that you're living in. So if you're in Nevada and you use Nevada LLC or Nevada Corporation, you then don't have to register again. And so in registration, so it's just extra money if you're using a different state. So to go over these main entities, corporation, the owners of a corporation are called shareholders or stockholders. You probably heard both of those terms. They're interchangeable. There is no legal difference. It's just some people like to say shareholder, some people like to say stockholder. It's managed, so it works with a corporation, and it's pretty rigid. Shareholders elect the board of directors, and the board of directors appoint the officers. So the board of directors oversee management of the corporation, and the shareholders just elect the board of directors and don't have a direct role in managing a corporation. So it's almost like a mini democracy. But also note that one person can be a stockholder, elect themselves as the sole director. So the board of directors can be just one director, and then that one director can appoint themselves as all of the officer positions. So I could be a shareholder, elect myself as the sole director, and then appoint myself as president, secretary, treasurer, CEO, everything. So one person can be everything. It's one thing to note. Governing documents, what governs the corporation, how it works, it's two documents. There's the certificate of incorporation, also sometimes called certificate of formation, or sometimes also called articles of incorporation or articles of formation. It depends on the state. But all the things that's filed with the state. And then you also have bylaws. And bylaws is a private document that you keep in your own records. And those two documents are what govern the corporation. The certificate of incorporation will include what kind of shares you have, like different classes of shares, and what rights and privileges each class of shares has. The bylaws talks about really about how election works, how do you choose, elect the board of directors, how do you appoint officers, things like that. So it's more of a mechanical kind of how are decisions made. And then, like I mentioned before, taxation, it's default to C Corp, unless you choose to be an S Corp. There is a limitation with S Corps in that to be an S Corp, all of shareholders, you have a maximum of 100 shareholders. You might want to double check that. I think they sometimes change that number, they increase that number. But it is 100 shareholders, and all shareholders have to be US citizens or permanent residents. So they all have to be US persons. You cannot have a foreigner be a shareholder of an S Corp. So that's one of the big limitations of an S Corp. So next with limited liability companies, you have the owners are called members. So if you ever hear the word members, that's LLC. You don't have members of a corporation. And you don't have shareholders of an LLC. There's two separate concepts. So there's members or the owners of an LLC. Management, you have a choice with an LLC. You can have it managed by a board of managers and basically run it similarly as you do a corporation. So the members choose the managers and the managers appoint the officers. Or if you'd like, with an LLC, you can delete the board of managers, not have one, and have everything done by the members directly. So it would be run almost like a partnership, and that the members appoint the officers just directly. You don't have the board. So there's two ways you can do it. The real thing to note about LLCs is that it's flexible. Anything you want, you can do it. If you want, you don't even have to call it members. You could call the owners whatever name you want. So you have complete flexibility with an LLC. The governing documents is a certificate of formation and the operating agreement, which is also sometimes called an LLC agreement or called a company agreement. It's all the same thing, different names. So just note, in the operating agreement or the LLC agreement or company agreement, whatever you want to call it, it is more robust than what you'd have like in bylaws. It actually will state not only kind of how you do any of the elections and things, you also state all the details about classes of membership interest, or you have like buy-sell clauses, which basically see what happens if a member gets divorced or dies or gets disabled. You can have all those provisions all in the operating agreement, which normally in a corporation you'd have in a separate shareholders agreement. With the LLC agreement, you kind of have it all in one and the equivalent of what's in bylaws. You have all of these provisions in there. So that's one thing to note, the LLC. And with taxation, as I mentioned, it's a choice. You can either have it as a pass-through, you can have it as a corporation, you can have it as an S corp. You choose how you want it to be. The default is to be a pass-through. I'll go through quickly tribal business structures in case you've been wondering about that. But the main thing to note is that there's three main types of tribal business structures. There's the IOA Section 17 corporation, state chartered tribal corporation, and tribally chartered corporation. The first two are essentially they're tribally owned. So for you, if you're an entrepreneur and you're starting your own, the first two aren't applicable for what you're doing. The first two is basically would have to be something that's owned by the tribe directly. But you could have a tribally chartered corporation. And a tribally chartered corporation will be the equivalent of having it like in another state. So because each tribe it has its own sovereign immunity, it can set up its own corporations. So just like that, you'd form a Delaware corporation, you could form a corporation under a tribal charter. The advantages of that is that you're not subject to any state tax that you would be, and potentially not subject to federal tax, but to not be subject to federal tax, you'd have to be considered an integral part of the tribe, which essentially means you're tribally owned, or at least close to being tribally owned. So for the most part, if you're trying to form an entrepreneurial kind of company on your own that's owned by you and you're going to be profiting from it, you wouldn't, well, you'd be subject to federal tax. So you could still be tribally chartered, but you'd be subject to federal tax. And you would have to register it in whatever state that you're using it. So it'd be really the equivalent of opening it up in a different state, pretty much the same kind of treatment as you would. So that's the things to note about. Yeah.
Question?
So when you say that it has to be in the same state as the tribe that you're from, if you want to do the tribally, the third one. So the business.
Well, it'd be considered a separate state, so or not a separate state, but it's apart from the state. But if that tribe is in, let's say it's in Arizona, you wouldn't be subject to Arizona tax.
So if my tribe is part, actually they're like around the four corners anyway. So would any of the four states work like Utah's, or would it just be specifically to just New Mexico and Arizona? Because part of it is in Colorado and then the other part is in Utah, sections of it, not the entire.
So essentially, yeah, you wouldn't be subject to any of the state taxes for the corporation, except to the extent you would have to, like, for example, if you set up an office in Colorado, you would then have to register that corporation in Colorado And then for whatever activities you had in Colorado, you'd be subject to state tax. But as far as like it's similar to like you set up like Texas is a franchise tax, but it's only subject to whatever monies you make in Texas. So whatever profit you're making from the other state, the Texas franchise tax doesn't apply to you. It's a similar concept here in that you would be still subject to state tax for what you're doing in that state because you'd have to register in that state. But for your headquarters being in the tribal, if your headquarters is in the tribal territory, then you wouldn't be subject to state tax for the activity going on there.
So on the other hand, though, Jose, if the tribes wanted to, could they impose their own tax because they're sovereign?
Yeah. Yes, which is why you're not subject to the state tax, because you're supposed to be then subject to the tribal tax. Now, one disadvantage, by the way, is that some banks find it harder to lend to you if you're tribally chartered because it depends on the tribe, and that some tribes, because what they would want is they wanted to have proof of it. And they can find proof for the state ones easily. They all have the state websites. Not all tribes will have it easily available like online or the ways to prove that, okay, I'm tribally chartered. So that would depend on the tribe.
Do you know of any tribes that do have their own internal tax?
I do not know.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt, but yeah, she had the question, I had the question too.
Well, I'll put it this way. I do know of tribes that tax. Do I know that they tax the corporations? That I don't know.
Okay.
So next, going like, well, what do you choose? Well, what do you go with? I'll explain. Here's the basic choices: LLCs, corporations, and then there's different states, and then there's the tribal structures. What do you go with? The first thing to consider is what's your strategy? What are you trying to do? If you're trying to get venture capital investment, well, let's say if you're trying to get like professional investors, when I say venture capital, just put it to professional investors. They all like to use corporations for one, not LLCs. One reason for that is there's a tax incentive called QSBS, which is qualified small business stock. And that is a tax incentive that says if I invest in a small business, I hold it for more than 5 years. And when I sell it, the business has less than 50 million in assets, then I don't pay taxes on the profit that I made from the sale. That's the basic here. I mean, there's no more details to that. There's some limitations, but that's basically what the tax incentive says, and it only applies to corporations. It does not apply to LLCs. So that's why a professional investor, they're going to want that tax incentive, and so then they're going to want to see a corporation. Now, it would apply to a tribally chartered corporation, the state one. So that's why they want corporation for one, and then two, most are going to prefer certain states. In the past, by the way, a year ago, 2 years ago, before 2 years ago, like I would say it's Delaware. Just don't even think about it. It's Delaware. But there is a movement starting since last year to consider alternatives, and the two other alternative states are Nevada and Texas. And recently, and I'm sure maybe Mag has seen this, but Andreessen Horowitz, which is one of the top venture capital firms in the US, one of the largest multi-billion, they came out with an article just about a month ago stating that they're moving all their entities to Nevada. And they recommend everyone else too. So they're moving from Delaware to Nevada. So there is a movement about to change that. So traditionally, Delaware was the place to be for corporation if you're looking for venture capital. Right now, you could do it in Nevada as well.
Jose,
Yes.
hi, sorry to interrupt you. You have a question online from Petra. Individuals can't do a tribally chartered since that is for tribally owned question. So as an individual on tribal lands, what would be LLC?
No, an individual can do a tribally chartered corporation. And as far as an LLC, so it depends on the tribe. So each tribe is different. I don't know if all of them have LLCs. So it would depend on the tribe. What I said is that what individuals cannot do is the first two in this list, which is a Section 17 corporation and a state chartered tribal corporation. So those two are really not for individuals. But an individual can do a tribally chartered corporation, which basically means it's a corporation, but it's chartered from the tribe instead of being chartered from a state. And I guess I don't want to confuse you because there's the state chartered tribal corporation, but that's a different thing. That's a tribal corporation that's state chartered, as opposed to a regular corporation that's state chartered. And that's basically every corporation is state chartered. But the first two in this list are tribally. An individual can do a tribally chartered corporation. Basically means it's a corporation that's formed under the laws of a tribe, like a sovereign tribe. And whether you can do an LLC or corporation, that depends on the tribe. So any other questions?
Any other questions in the room? Any online? Petra, did that answer your question? Okay, I got it. Maybe my tribe has UCC codes, question mark.
Well, UCC is like a,
Isn't that
I mean, yeah,
commerce?
you could. So UCC is like a uniform code it was created in universities, and they said to the states, "Hey, why don't you pass all these?" And so then most states have passed the UCC codes. And so, yeah, can a tribe do that? Yes, they can. But that has UCC codes don't really have anything to do with this. UCC codes have to do with how to treat contracts and like goods and contracts for goods and services. It doesn't have anything to do with formation of entities.
Okay, she said thank you.
So yeah, so that's why the main thing to think about is, okay, what's your strategy, what you're doing it for? So if you're looking for professional investors, they're going to want certain states. If you're forming a company that's really for like personal services, like a consulting thing, where you're just making an income and you're not planning on trying to sell your company in the future, then you can do an LLC. An LLC will make more sense because you're not looking to sell the company in the future. So QSBS, and plus QSBS does not apply to personal services companies. In other words, companies based on like consulting or legal, for example, or physicians' offices, things like that aren't under QSBS. So in other words, if you're not doing that tax incentive, doesn't matter. LLC is actually it's passed through, so you're not going to be double taxed. So it can be much better. And then the state, you could do the state where you're living, or if you're living in tribal lands, you could do it. It would actually make more sense to be tribally chartered if you're centered or you're having your headquarters or something on the tribal lands, or whatever state you're in. That's what would make more sense for an LLC. Because if you do it in another state, you have to register it wherever you're located, or you have offices, or you have employees. That's another thing to note. If you have employees in different states, you have to register your entity in that state. So
We
yes,
have one
those are
more
the kind of-
question.
Yeah.
I apologize. We have one more
Okay.
question from the room. 1 second.
Just a question about the incentives for the VCs again, and what the advantages is for them for a corporation versus a LLC.
It's the QSBS, Qualified Small Business Stock, QSBS. And just to put it simply, if you invest in a corporation and you hold it for 5 years, and then there's like a whole bunch of other things, but their advantage is zero tax, 0% tax. It's a huge thing. So if I'm an investor, just imagine I invest in an LLC, I'm going to have to pay a minimum of the capital gains tax, which is at least 20%, or I invest in a corporation and it's 0% tax. So it's a huge incentive. So that's why they do it.
Thank you.
Yeah. And by the way, it applies to the founders too. So if you're a founder, it applies to you too. When you sell your shares, it'll also be 0%. Now, again, there's some limitations. I could spend an hour talking about QSBS because it's very complex, but that's the 10-second version of it. But basically, it is a huge incentive. And the reason why, partly, just tell you, is because the IRS wants the double taxation. Because if not, everyone would be doing LLCs. But here's a way to push people to do corporations, which will be taxed separately, so you get double taxed. So the IRS they want this so that you form a corporation, you start getting taxed from day one, and you're going to stay a corporation. So that's the reasons for the strategy. That's the thing to think about. Okay, if I'm choosing which kind of entity, well, what's my strategy? What's my end goal? Is it to sell the company? Is it for personal services? Is it just to make an income? So that'll decide where you're doing it and where you're going to do it. Home state versus Delaware, or now I would say Delaware or Nevada. It also has to do with that strategy. And then there's also cost, because again, if you have to go in a bunch of different states, if you have to incorporate, or not, you have to register your corporation in a different state, That's just adding to your costs. And then the last issue I have listed here is the double taxation versus QSBS. Because that's really the choice. If you form a corporation, you're going to be double taxed. But you have the possibility that after 5 years, you can sell it and then pay no tax under QSBS.
So a question from the room is, so in the scenario of everybody here that has a smaller business independently owned for the most part, would you suggest LLCs?
Well, I think
Yes.
most people in this class are likely small businesses being created to create LLCs. I just did the little LLC partnership thing. So I found a tax lady and she helped me with it. So I have a little bit of knowledge, but when you went to corporate, I got totally lost. Like, I don't understand the corporate structure at all. And I just wonder if a lot of the people in this meeting are probably more prone to the smaller LLC, or can an S corp be small? Can you start the corporate with one person? Because I think like some of the people in this room are making tea or selling art, small things that would be like a LLC.
Yeah. So for most small
That better
business,
LLC?
sorry to interrupt, but for small businesses, you have no plans to sell your company or to grow it, to sell it at a large profit. If yours is more for like income, you're getting kind of personal income, then yes, the LLC is what I would recommend. And if you want to, and then there's a strategy to lower your taxes. And the tax strategy is you form an LLC because it's just easier. LLCs are just simpler and easier to use. And then you file with the IRS. It's easy filing to make. You file with the IRS to be taxed, to tax your LLC as an S corp. So I'm going to repeat it so that you're saying it's an LLC. You file with the IRS to tax your LLC as an S corp. So you become an S corp LLC. You do that so that you can hire yourself as an employee of your LLC. And you do that so that you pay less payroll tax.
So can a member become an employee in that way when it gets S?
If you're an S corp, a member cannot be an employee of a regular pass-through LLC, but a member can be an employee of an S corp LLC. So, like, I just want to repeat, S corp is a tax status. It is the IRS classification. It is not legal. S corp, C
So
corp,
sorry.
they're not legal.
If member, so in LLC member, their income, their business's income cannot be paid in a paycheck to the LLC owner. Like, you couldn't pay yourself a check. Is that right? An
Correct.
LLC, and then you need to form
Correct.
it as S corp in order to pay yourself a check and have a personal income versus.
Well, so let me tell you, like, let's say you've been doing it. Let's say you've been paying yourself a paycheck and you didn't know this. Well, what happens is that you think you're paying yourself a paycheck, but from a tax standpoint, from an accounting standpoint, from an IRS standpoint, those aren't paychecks. Those are distributions from your LLC. So,
Those taxable. I have so many questions. I could probably take up a lot of time here, guys. I hope.
so what I would
Those
suggest is
taxable?
talk to your CPA. This is a CPA issue. So this is
have
not a
CPA.
legal issue. It's a CPA, and you need to
Oh.
talk to your CPA. It's a tax thing. It's a complete tax thing. But I want to mention to everybody because it is a way to lower your payroll tax. This is what I suggest. Write this down, Google it later, because there are like 1,000 websites giving advice to consultants on how to lower your taxes. And there's 1,000 websites that talk about this strategy. It's a common strategy. I use it for my law firm because my law firm is an LLC and I'm taxed as an S corp. And then now I'm an employee, and then now I'm able to pay myself. And the reason for it is to lower my payroll tax. And again, yeah, this is another issue that we could talk about this for an hour. What I suggest is go on Google and type in S Corp LLC payroll tax. Type that in, and you're going to find 1,000 articles on this topic. And then you'll understand. I guess now, if you're not used to it, you're just going to get confused really simply and easily. But just Google S Corp LLC payroll tax. And you're going to see this is a tax strategy. And this is what you have to know. Go to LLC, file it as an S Corp, and then make yourself an employee. Now, again, if you're not making much income, doesn't matter right now. But when you start making some income, if you start relying on the income of your business, you definitely need to do this. It'll save you about 16% on taxes.
Justin
Um,
has a question.
Oh, hi, Jose.
yeah,
Um,
hello.
I don't know if this is coming in your presentation later, but are you going to talk about maybe like a public benefit corporation?
It's not, but I can cover it real quickly. And I see there's a question about nonprofits, and I'll just tell you this: so so public benefit corporation is essentially just a regular corporation, but you're basically stating that I'm doing the corporation for a certain public benefit, and you put into the certificate of incorporation what is the public benefit that you're doing. And the main point is basically you're saying is that if I'm not providing this public benefit, sue me. Basically what you're saying is sue me if I'm not providing this public benefit. So because normally you can only be sued for not making a profit. And a public benefit is saying, hey, in addition to not making a profit for my shareholders, I also want to be sued in case I'm not providing a public benefit that I've said that I'm going to provide. So, and in that way, and the reason you do that is basically you're trying to tell people, hey, I'm not just out for profit, I'm also out for making a certain public benefit, whatever it is. And you choose what your public benefit is, you put it into your certificate of incorporation. So the benefit of it, the reason you would do that is really to kind of just to signal to people that, hey, I'm not just about profits. So that some people will like to shop at a business that's a public benefit because you know that, hey, they're providing a public benefit in addition, and they're not just trying to make profit. Now, a nonprofit is basically, well, as it says, you're not making a profit. Or sorry, your goal is not is not to make profits. Your goal is whatever is a charitable purpose. And so your goal is a charitable purpose, and in exchange, you don't pay. Well, if you you make the right filings with the IRS, the most common is a 501(c)(3), then you don't have to pay federal and most likely state income taxes. So you don't have to pay taxes, but you are only working for a charitable purpose, which means you're not making a profit, which means that any excess monies that you have, you can only use it for the charitable purpose. And it also means that there's issues of conflict of interest where if you're on the board, you can't use the nonprofit to make yourself more money. You can pay yourself. You can pay yourself, but it needs to be like some kind of fair market value. And if you overpay yourself, or let's say you have another business and you use the nonprofit to use your other business, you could have some potential problems of conflict of interest. So that it can get sometimes complex where you're going to be kind of limited in what you can do. But if what you want to do is really do something that's for a charitable purpose and it's not about making money, and you're fine with, you know, with the conflict of interest rules, which is basically like you can't, because the common way that people get in trouble is I form a nonprofit, I start selling things for it, and then I need to like subcontract with someone, and I'm going to subcontract with another company that I own. If I'm on the board of directors, I can't be choosing my own company. That's conflict of interest rules. Or you could potentially, but you'd have to show that it's all at fair market value, and you have to show that this was a good deal for the nonprofit. Otherwise, you could get into some problems that you're misusing your nonprofit, and it's some criminal liability when you get into that territory. So that's the reason. That's the nonprofit. And then the PBC, Public Benefit Corporation, is like I said, is really just you're allowing yourself to be sued for reasons other than profit.
So just so I understand, Jose, for the public benefit corporation, is there like a federal board or agency that like oversees that, like where you have to like get
No.
vetted? Like even if you do write it into your articles of incorporation, is it just
No.
pretty much you're saying I'm a public benefit corporation? If somebody out there, Joe
So
Schmo,
it's one thing that people don't realize, because I work actually internationally.
okay,
So in most of the countries, you register everything. In the US, there is no federal nothing. It is
okay,
complete freedom. In some senses, it's like the Wild West. Like no one knows who's the owner of your company other than you. Even if you go to the state, I make a Nevada corporation, I file my certificate. All that certificate says is who had organized it, and the address. There's no information as to who owns the company. There's no one keeping track of who owns it. The only way that the federal government keeps track of anything is through the employer identification number, the EIN, and that's for tax purposes. But otherwise, there's no one keeping track of who owns what. That's all a private document. It's the reason why in America we have many more lawsuits, because basically what we've outsourced is instead of having to register with the government for everything, it's all private documents, and if somebody starts lying, you have problems, then you just sue each other. And the lawsuit is what keeps track of everything instead of having the government do it. So there's nothing federal for anything, for none of this. There's no federal oversight for anything.
Unless you're a nonprofit and you take in more than $1 million in federal funds, then you have to do an audit, and that is public information.
Yes, well, that is because of the tax part. So as I said, where the federal government gets involved is with taxes. And if you want to go to the government and say, I want to be a nonprofit and not pay any taxes, then the IRS is up your butt.
Yep.
Because they want their taxes. They want their taxes. So you're going to not pay taxes? Well, we're going to
look at you really closely.
Yes, that's right. That's right. But otherwise, that's the reason why the federal government gets involved, and it's for tax purposes. But as far as ownership and all that, the public benefit corporation is still paying taxes. A public benefit corporation still pays taxes the same. There's no difference other than and that's what I'm trying to keep it real, really. It's the only difference really with the public benefit is that you're allowed to be sued for other reasons.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful because I've had my LLC now for over 5 years, and a lot of the work that I'm doing is like benefiting the public, but I don't want to do a nonprofit because I don't really believe in them to a certain degree. So I'm just being honest about how I feel. But yeah, so I was like, oh, but I could do a public benefit. Like I could agree with that because you could do like a website that's like .org and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You can still
So there isn't oversight, but the reason the oversight, again, like I mentioned, is the lawsuits. So what happens is if somebody, like a consumer, can say, hey, you're telling me that you're trying to do this public benefit, but you're really not. And you're just keeping all the money to yourself. You're not really helping anybody but yourself. So I'm going to sue you saying that you're not providing the public benefit that you stated you're going to. And that's how it works. So it's not a government that's keeping track. It's going to be someone on the street. Or I'll tell you how most lawsuits happen. It's going to be one of your former employees that's pissed off.
Yeah. He said he's never hiring anybody. And then you have the question online.
Then it'll be a spouse. Then it's going to be an ex-spouse. So that's how most of these lawsuits all happen.
So Elizabeth's question.
He addressed the
Oh,
nonprofit already.
Okay, then never mind. Then we have no more questions. Thank you. And
Okay.
don't get divorced if you guys own a business together. Okay. Oh,
But-
we do have another question. Sorry.
Yeah.
It was actually because they brought up some good points I was curious about. If let's say you have a nonprofit, right? And you said it's very dangerous to the board, if you're on the board of the nonprofit, you can't have your company involved in any way, right? With the nonprofit. Is that
No,
right?
you can, but you have to be careful that you're not violating conflict of interest. So you're supposed to have, to get the non-tax to get the 501c3 status, you're going to have 3 board members. And so let's say 2 of them let's say the business only belongs to you. Then the decision to use your business should be from the other 2. And it shouldn't be that your business is taking advantage of the nonprofit. So whatever you're doing for the nonprofit, like it should be like fair market value. It should be like something standard. It shouldn't be clear that, hey, I'm using my position on the board to just make myself a lot of money off of all this stuff that's not taxed.
I understand. All right. I want to make a request. Can you give an example of like a nonprofit using that model, like a company and nonprofit, and it's working, and then an example of a nonprofit and a company and it's not working, or it's illegal, or something like that?
Well, I say working
or legal. Sorry.
I'll give you an example. Is that like my wife has a nonprofit because she does rhythmic gymnastics, and she doesn't make much money off of it, but what she needs is like sponsors. So she felt like, hey, having a nonprofit, she could still pay herself, because she's paying herself just minimum wage essentially, but it makes it easier for her to raise money from sponsors. But then she needs legal help. So then they hired my law firm. So I'm related to her. There's a conflict of interest there, but I was charging like below market rates. So I could charge market rates too, and it'd be fine because they need a law firm, and it just happens that but as long as like it's not like, oh, I'm charging all of a sudden $2,000 an hour, and normally I charge, you know, $500 an hour, then it would look like, okay, I'm just trying to sweep all this money out of the nonprofit. That's where it wouldn't work. Other examples, most common one is there's a lot of corporations out there that'll have a nonprofit arm. So it's pretty common to have that. So just to have some kind of a link to it is nothing inherently wrong with it, but there are issues when you start using it. Like for example, most pharmaceuticals have a nonprofit arm, but if they start using their nonprofit arm to just to raise money to buy their own drugs to give out to people, that would be a conflict of interest. Now, what they do use them for instead is, hey, they'll have programs for people who don't have money, maybe for drugs. And if you apply, and they'll have a certain process so that it doesn't matter whose drug that it's just for someone that doesn't have enough money. And so maybe it's used for their drugs, maybe it's not, but it's outside of their own control and it's through a certain process. Then it can be okay. Just the guiding principle is this: are you using your position for the nonprofit to benefit yourself? And if that's what you're doing, that's going to be a problem.
Okay. What about another example? Like maybe the roles were reversed. Like say, instead of the company having the nonprofit arm, the nonprofit has the corporate arm. Well, not the arm because it can be connected. But like say, like you said, the example of the programs, they're using something to distribute something. Can they hire that company to make the product, to distribute the whatever, anything?
So yeah, you're right. It says there's no arms, but there's going to be connections, and that's what you have to watch out for. What's the connection there? Is there conflict? Is there someone that's in a position of power of the nonprofit that has the position, that has the ability to make decisions for the nonprofit, and using that in order to benefit themselves or someone in their family? If they're doing that, that's what it is. So there's always a connect. So that's the connection. So you're saying whichever direction. No, the person who's going to jail is the person that's on a position of power in the nonprofit. That's who's going to jail.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Jose, this is all great information. And I have one more question that's more practical for me. Like, is the LLC able to start like an S corp, or is that, sorry, the file for a corporation, or is that something that an individual has to do, or does it matter? Like, because I know an LLC can, like, through your LLC, you can file and create another LLC. Yeah, like a master LLC.
Master
or
in
something.
series.
Yeah.
So that's a whole different thing. That's a series LLC, and a series LLC is a different structure, and that's a structure where a series LLC, you register that, you form a series LLC, and once you have a series LLC, it's whatever name you want, XYZ series LLC, and that can then form series underneath it, and those are different. Technically it's called a cell. You have a series cell that are formed under each series LLC, and the series LLC is what's registered with the state. And that's a whole separate kind of structure. So it's not that the series LLC is now forming whatever they want. It's the series LLC is an LLC that can form series.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. All right. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, let's move on now.
Yeah, you guys will have more questions, I'm sure. But the next thing I have here is a basic kind of checklist, just for you to know. Like once you form your entity, you're going to want to form an EIN. An EIN is an employer identification number. It's the equivalent of a social security number. I would never pay to get this done, by the way, because you can do it yourself. It's irs.gov/EIN. It takes all of 5 minutes to do. You may have some questions as you're doing it, but generally speaking, if you pay someone else to do it, they're going to have to ask you the same questions that this does. So it's not going to be any different. You're going to have to, because there's like a whole bunch of questions they ask, and only you know the answer. So if you pay someone else to do it, they're going to have to ask you all these questions, and then you give them the answer, and then all they do is turn around and go onto the website and try and fill it out. So I would just suggest you get it yourself. It's pretty quickly done. It's one thing that's odd about it is that you can only do it during business hours, even though it's online. Like it won't work right now. It'll only work during business hours, but you can do it online. So once you get your EIN, and at the end, it'll tell you once you fill it out, it'll ask you if you want it in PDF or if you want it by mail. Always do PDF, because if you do it by mail, they won't tell you the number. You have to wait to get it by mail. And it'll take like 2 weeks to get it by mail. They don't send it immediately. So it'll take you 2 weeks to get the number. Or if you choose PDF, you'll get the number immediately. So that's one thing. So you get the EIN, and you need that to get a bank account. So for a bank to open a business account, they'll need your EIN and a copy of your filed certificate of incorporation or formation, whatever it is. So you need those two things to form your bank account. One thing you might have heard: DBA, assumed name, same thing, just different words, but the same thing. And just note that you can call your LLC anything you want, and then you have a DBA for something else. So an example is Google's legal name is Alphabet Inc. The DBA is Google. So you know it as Google, but the legal name is Alphabet Inc. So if you look up and you're saying, oh my gosh, my name's already taken, I can't form my Inc. Well, just form whatever name you want and then use a DBA for that. Because you can do DBAs for things that are already taken.
Question about DBA.
Yeah.
So in the LLC, we can form whatever name we want. What about the assumed member's name? Can I assume any name, or do I have to use my real name?
Yes.
I can
Well-
be anyone. I could be
Well,
James Bond.
Well, you said the word assumed member name. That doesn't exist. What you just said doesn't exist. So an assumed name it's the same thing as a DBA. It's just another name for your for your business.
Does my name need, so like, for example, my specific situation, I'm Nick, but I want to be Nate so that I can differentiate the different types of business. So if I were to call myself Nate and put Nate on my business documents, even though it says Nick on the initial forming,
That's
any legal issue?
So yes, you're talking about something different. You're talking about your own legal name. Your legal
okay.
name is your legal name, and you can't change it. It's your name on your birth certificate or your driver's license, and that's what it is. That's your legal name. And when you're making corporate documents, it's going to ask for a person on there, and it needs to be their legal name. You can't just start changing your name around as you want, because well, or let's say what happens if you do that. You start doing that, and then someone else says you don't own those shares. And you're going to say, yes, I do. Well, prove it. Show me your name and your ID. And if you have a different name on your ID as the name on your legal documents, you now do not own your company.
What about this one? If I have a person working for the company or the member who's not named, but the owner, wait, the member is me. I'm so confused. I could probably take up a lot of your time, Jose, actually. I'll watch a YouTube video.
Well, this is what I would say though, is don't be cute. A lot of people think you're like, how about if I do this? How about I do this? All you're doing is giving yourself headaches. Every time I see people do this, well, it's good for me. You're giving me a lot more work, because lawyers, I get paid a lot to fix stuff like this, and you pay a lot of money to fix it. So I would just say keep things as simple as possible. Simple is
He
good.
wants to use another name is essentially like what you're trying to do.
Well, yeah, on the LLC documents, it says Nicholas Todicini, right?
Yeah.
But I don't want someone to be able to search my name and look at my Facebook and instantly find everything about me. So I wanted to assume a name that you would contact my company and say, hey, is Bob there? And I would be Bob, so you can't find me as easily. That's all I was thinking, just some barrier. But I didn't know if I could call myself that.
Well, so the one thing to note is that it's not your name. So your name, your own, like I said, your ownership is not publicly available. Unless what's publicly available is who's the organizer. If you pay a lawyer to file the documents for you, then their names will be on the publicly filed document, not your name as the owner. Or in some states, I think in Nevada will ask for who's the members' names, but it's not on the public website.
Oh, okay.
The registered agent can file for you. You
Yeah.
can be your own
Now,
registered
if
agent.
you're really concerned and you want it to be super secret about who's owning anything, then what you do is you file in Wyoming. Wyoming does not require any information of personal information at all. So people who are really concerned about being anonymous, you file a Wyoming LLC, you put no personal information. Wyoming doesn't know who you are, and then that Wyoming LLC will own your Nevada entity. And then your Nevada entity is owned by Wyoming. And so anyone trying to look up Nevada, they're going to see Wyoming, and then they go to Wyoming and there's nothing there. Now, with that said, you can always sue the entity to get the name of the owners. So it's not perfect protection in that ultimately a human being has to be found. And if it's not publicly available, someone can sue to get that information.
So you can't be a total ninja. Sorry.
Correct. You can try, but eventually someone will. If there's someone who really wants to get to know you, they'll eventually get to you. But if all you're worried about is someone like online and trying to find your, then the route to go is Wyoming. That's what people do.
Kids and then determine something about my business based on my Facebook. So I was considering not.
So somebody might not be happy with your services, for instance, and they could look up your whole family and all that.
So I was considering listing my name as Nate at my business address, nate@deserttortoiseandhair.com. And I was like, is that legal? Like that when
No.
the DBA came up, I wondered if I should form the DBA under that name so that it's listed as Nate, but there was like a legal anything I would want.
Is there a legal loophole? Can he form the DBA?
So the DBA is it's doing business as. It's the name that you're
It's
doing
not your
business
name,
as.
yeah.
It is not a legal name. So there's certain parts where they say, what's your legal name? You can't use a DBA as your legal name.
I gotta delete my Facebook.
Yeah, delete your social media. There you go. Okay, Jose.
Yes. So there's that licenses and permits. I have that here. That relates to different businesses have licenses, right? If you're going to be doing like cannabis, there's cannabis licenses. Some businesses do not. A lot of places will have the business licenses. Clark County, for example, has a business license. The business license essentially is it's really just a tax because I think what is it? It's like $50. I think it's like all it is you just give your name and address and the name of your business. But these are required in order to do business in different places. So depending on where you're living, you may have a business license, and then depending on what kind of business you're doing, you may have different licenses and permits. But it's important to keep that in mind that you need to be properly licensed for whatever you're doing, and look into see where you're living if it requires a business license in order to exist. And then there's the corporate formalities. These are the formalities where like you have an LLC, in major decisions, like at least once a year, it's a good idea to have like what I say, like a resolution. That can be done through a meeting or like written consents where you just write down what the LLC is, or the owners of the LLC, major decisions that they've agreed to. Just you have something on paper that says, okay, especially, and if you're doing anything to do with ownership, you make sure that you have those things approved by whoever needs to approve them, the majority of the members. Or if it's just, even if it's just you by yourself, you need to make sure that you approve the major things. Like if you're getting a big loan, okay, you approve that like as a formality. These things are really helpful in the future if you ever try to sell the company or if you ever get sued, if you're showing, because what you need to show is that you're treating the LLC or the corporation as a separate person. Because one way people can try to sue and get at your personal assets is they're going to say, this is just an extension of your personal assets because you're not treating it seriously. You're treating the LLC like it doesn't exist. Like you're mixing your funds, you're not having a separate business account. You have things in your name, but the business is using it. You're not doing any formal decision making. Those are all things that people show as proof that this isn't a real LLC. And thus, because it isn't a real LLC, I can now sue and get your house and your car. So the way to protect yourself is you treat it like it's a separate person. You have a separate business account and you don't mix the money. You can pay yourself. You can move money around, but you always make sure that you're accounting for all that. And then you have formal decisions that you have written down. All that can help and say, you know what, I'm treating this as a separate person, and can protect yourself in the event of a lawsuit. Lastly, 83B election. This is really not applicable here. It's more applicable if you are doing like a startup and you're having like stock option, well, not really stock options, but you're having like vesting schedules, which is something that you do with a lot of startups. But in this case, probably it's like a tax thing you do in that case. But if you're just having straight ownership of your company, it's not applicable.
Jose, can we review the whole Wyoming, Nevada thing? What do you start in Wyoming and then you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So what you would do is you'd form a Wyoming LLC. And then you would have to have someone else form it, because if you're forming it yourself, what Wyoming does ask for is who's forming it, who's filing this document. It will basically ask whoever's filing, like someone has to sign the document, or it could be electronic service. Someone has to actually sign the document, and that is the organizer. And so you should have someone else do it. So you could, that's when you, if you have like a lawyer, like a law firm does it. And that's actually the best way to keep it really anonymous, because if it's a law firms are doing it for many different people. So it's like, okay, who are you doing it? If you have your friend do it, the problem is, well, they know that it's someone that's in your sphere, right? Someone that's your friend, so they can be identifiable to you. But if you have a law firm, they're doing it for many other people. Anyway, so then that's the only name that appears on it. So you have a Wyoming LLC formed by a general organizer, and then you have your Wyoming LLC controlled by you. And then the Wyoming LLC is the owner of the Nevada LLC. And then when you file in Nevada, Nevada will ask who's the member, and you'll say the member is the Wyoming LLC. And then your LLC can appoint anyone to sign on its behalf, or you have like a law firm that then signs on your behalf.
So
to file
do
it.
you have to renew those entities in both states every year?
Well, it's not renewing, but you do have to pay. There are annual fees that you have to pay for every entity.
Yeah.
I forgot off the top of my head what's the fee for Wyoming, but Nevada is $350 a year.
Okay. What's next, Jose?
Let me see where my online. I was thinking about what lawyer. Okay, I was going to go IP. For anyone that has any intellectual property, everyone has some IP, by the way. And there's 4 types of IP. There's patents, copyrights, trademarks, trade secrets. You probably won't have patents. Patents are expensive to get. Copyrights, anything written, like even if you create like a PowerPoint, like this PowerPoint, it's a copyright. And as you see, how do I claim my copyright? Well, you see at the bottom, it says that C symbol 2025 video law policy. That's me claiming this copyright. That's one way to do it. You can also register a copyright, but your ownership comes from claiming it. And you do that from that little C of the circle. Trademarks are similar in that trademarks, your rights to a trademark come from using it. So usage preempts everything. And then you can register a trademark. Registration costs $350. That's the USPTO fee. But registration doesn't give you rights to it. Registration just makes it easier to protect your rights. Basically, you're like the default owner. But if someone else can prove that they've been using it before you, then they'll own the trademark, even if you registered and they didn't. So registration just makes it easier to defend, but actual ownership comes from using the trademark. So that's one thing to note. And then trade secrets. A trade secret is basically that nebulous. It's basically a trade secret is anything that helps you make money and is different, and is you're using it, doing something that's different than what other people are doing, that helps you make money, and there's value to it. There's value from how you are using the information. So a trade secret could include a customer list. A trade secret could include a formula. The famous trade secret is Coca-Cola's formula. And the way you keep your rights to a trade secret is by keeping it secret. So if you start telling people, if you have a customer list, but you print it out and you share it with your friends, well, then now you lose your rights to the trade secret. So if you want to keep your rights to a trade secret, you keep it a secret. Now you can maybe share it with a friend, but they have to sign an NDA first. So that's why you have to make sure people sign NDAs so that, okay, these things are my trade secrets and no one can see them unless they promise to keep it secret. So that's what you have. And almost everyone has some kind of trade secret. Like again, like the example of a customer list. Like that right there is a trade secret. Contracts to think about, and these are NDAs, which I mentioned, which are non-disclosure agreements. It's also called confidentiality agreements. You should have anyone that's having access to your secret information that they sign that. And your employees or contractors, they should be signing similar, or at least like in a contractor agreement, like so that maybe you pay, you sign to do whatever they're doing for you. You include a confidentiality clause in that. Then there's shareholder agreements, or for an LLC, it would be the operating agreement. If you're going to have business partners, you need to have agreements with your business partners, what to do in the event of death, disability, divorce. The reason for the divorce is that the ownership in a divorce, the spouse can take some of the ownership, and maybe the other business partner doesn't want to work with the spouse, right? So that you want to make sure that what happens in a divorce, so that maybe it's the shares get bought or the membership interest gets bought back or whatever happens to it. In other words, you make all those decisions up front. Then you have your customer contracts and any licensing. If there, in this case, maybe most of yours, if smaller businesses, the thing to remember with customer contracts is the things to pay attention to is like how does it terminate, and then how does it deal with liability. Like if you're providing a service or a good, what happens if you do something wrong, like who somebody gets hurt, who's liable, who's paying for it. That's, or how do you limit your liability? Like maybe you'll be liable because you're the one who provided the service and you're the one that screwed up, but you don't want to have unlimited liability, or you don't want your business to have unlimited liability. You want to limit that. So a lot of times you'll say that, okay, I'll limit the liability to just how much you've paid me over the past year. That's one way to limit it. So those are things to look for in kind of customer contracts. And I had some other things here at capitalization table, but this is really not applicable if you're looking to develop a company to sell later. But yeah, that's kind of it. I don't know if you have any more questions. So there are a lot of questions, and I'm happy to answer some more questions.
Any more questions?
No. Anybody online? Oh, wait, do we have a question in the room? No, nope.
I would say that I saw online someone said about someone worked in tax and accounting for a decade and they recommend simple setups, and I would agree with that. That sometimes a lot of people, they read online and they hear about all these complex setups, but a lot of times these complex setups, they make sense when you're a billion-dollar company. Like for example, like with IP, it makes sense for patents that you don't have them in a US corporation. You have your patents in a foreign corporation. You hold them there, and that so that and then you pay royalties on that. And that makes sense, and that can help you save money when you're a billion-dollar company. But the problem is it can cost you like $1 million to set these things up in another country and to keep them up. And there's a lot of things, there's a lot of work involved in these things. Worth it when you're a small business. So that's one thing to know, because sometimes you'll see a lot of advice. I think the only thing that's maybe complex that's worth it when you're a small business is this thing about the S Corp LLC with payroll tax. That is something that is worthwhile for all the small business owners if you're making an income off of your business. Like I do it for my LLC. And I think, like I said, yeah, Jose@padilla.law is my email address, and happy to help anyone with any more questions in the future.
Thanks, Jose.
Thank you.
All right. Well,
clapping.
you have a lot of thank yous in the room and some online, so we really appreciate your time today, Jose. I'm sorry we ran over a little bit, but you were definitely helpful with a lot of the questions.
No problem.
Okay, then I guess I will end the online. So thank you everybody for joining online. Please don't forget to check in. Maggie, would you mind copying and pasting that link again?
Oh, the check-in link? Yeah.
Yeah, because it was doing something weird when I tried. And you all have Jose's email in case you have any more questions. And then everybody in the room, we will see you Wednesday.
Yep. And we'll see you online Wednesday too.
Unless you guys want to come in person, we have room.
Okay.
Okay. Bye, Jose.
Thank you. Bye,
Good
Jose.
night.
Okay. All right. Bye, everybody online.
Yep. Bye online.